To start off with, let's talk about your journey as an IT professional, how you got into the industry, how your career came about. I understand that you did arts degree to start with.
Pretty close, Paul, but thank
Right.
you for the interview going forward. I started off with a social science degree, which is pretty close to an arts degree,
Right.
and in the days that I did those things, everything was manual, and I did quite a lot of statistics in the social science side of things, and then I went on and did a teaching degree. I never went teaching. I did a few jobs here and there, and I ended up writing reports. And one day I was given a job to do some work to help deploy and describe specifications for an information system.
Right.
About which I knew nothing, and this was at the late 80s. They were computerising some offices, and I realised I didn't know anything about it, but I said I could do the work anyway.
Right.
And I got involved in doing that, and I realised I was becoming a business analyst, and I realised that I didn't know that very much about it, so I thought, well, I'd better go and do something about finding people who do know something about it, and that's when I joined the ACS.
Right.
So I came in through a side door, if you like, the ACS, and I do remember, this is sort of interesting, sort of looking back, and the difference today is that when I applied to join the ACS, I remember sending off my application, and I was very diligent about it and getting my referees and all of those sorts of things to be able to join the ACS. And I remember sweating on the result. It was almost like getting your qualification for a degree or something.
Yep.
And when I got it, I remember the moment opening the letter, because it was letters in those days,
Sure.
and thinking, wow, I've got it, because I wasn't confident I'd be get in. And that was great, because I joined the ACS and I was able to get involved in some of the networking things, but probably most importantly, I did a computer science certificate with the Piercy Centre,
Right.
which then articulated into a graduate diploma. But working with the Piercy Centre obviously got me involved with the ACS, because it was a collaboration between the Piercy Centre, Engineers Australia with their former name, and ACS in those days, so it put us in there. And that eventually also articulated some years later and into an MBA. So it all went through that passage in that way. So all on the back of joining ACS and the need to understand a little bit about how to computerise offices, which in those days was actually putting the first computers in to an office space, and there was no semblance of computerisation. We had look-up tables with cards. We had what they called the microfiches, which you had to sit down and nearly go blind because they were so small and you couldn't see anything. And so we worked through those, and I ended up doing a lot of work talking to users, trying to work out what their processes were, what data they actually needed to do, looking at any number of forms that they used and working out how you could actually document those. And I was part of quite a reasonable sized team, so I was learning as I was going, which was great. Then got involved in project management methodologies in terms of what do you need to do as a set of steps to actually describe a computer system, which again built my understanding. I realised I quite enjoyed that, and whether I enjoyed it or not, it was what I was doing, so I was getting other work on the back of that. So I worked for quite a few years doing that sort of work. And then I moved into management consulting, which I joined one of the big six as they were in those days, and I was there for 10 years doing much the same thing, which is what I still do today, specialise in strategy and architecture, helping organisations who want to have an idea about the technology opportunity that they've got, and I do work around, well, this is how you might deploy it. These are some of the things you need to consider, work out the business case, work out the models that are required, and feasibility studies, so those sorts of things. So that's the journey, if you think of in ACS as a practitioner, if you like.
So what year was it that you joined ACS?
I think it was 1990 or 1989. It was certainly that era. So well before internet, well before voicemail. I remember voicemail coming in the mid-90s, major step forward. And yes, everything was manual, as I said. Even when I did statistics back at university in the mid-80s, that was a matter of handing in your check sheets and everything else,
Right.
and someone would data process that overnight,
Mm.
and you'd come back in the morning to work out whether you passed or failed, which was always annoying.
Yeah, just let it run through. Yeah.
Well, it had
Right.
to be done overnight
Yeah.
because you couldn't do it. You never actually saw the machine that did all of this stuff.
Right.
You'd put it through a little pigeonhole box and
Mm. Yeah.
presume the mice at night would come along and take it away and do it and put your results back in the hole. So
Right.
that's
Yeah.
the way that was taught. And
Mm.
I was lucky enough to be right at the beginning of computerization,
Yeah.
and that's where we started to put computers into offices.
Mm.
You know,
Yeah.
one floor, which was down here in St Kilda Road,
Mm.
Department of Veterans Affairs in those days.
Okay, yep.
The argument was there, shall we have one terminal between 30 people or two terminals? Because
Right.
they'll probably not use it.
Yeah.
Which, if you look in that sort of office these days, that's a ridiculous statement in hindsight. But
For sure.
they
Yeah.
were the things, and it was all mainframe computing
Mm.
and everything else there.
Yeah.
So
And very expensive too.
I'm sure it was, but I
Yeah.
wasn't involved
Right.
in that
Yeah.
side of things.
Yeah. So when you joined ACS, how did you find the environment, the mentoring, the activities at the time?
My memories are pretty positive because I got in with a crowd who were doing similar things to what I was interested in. So I'm not a technical person,
Yeah.
but there are also a lot of people who in ACS who were technical or even semi-technical, which was really helpful to build up that network with those people, and also colleagues at work who were also either part of the ACS or part of the ICT area. It was a whole learning experience to get those things happening. So that was involvement.
Yeah.
I won't say that was intense, but the education side of it, which in those days was sitting in a really drafty, cold room in Caulfield Technology
Okay.
area where the PSC Centre was located in those days.
Yeah.
Doing your homework and working with other groups and doing that sort of stuff. So that sort of brought the whole thing together.
Yeah. So, so what were some of the characters, some of the individuals that you found were the most supportive and the most well connected at that time?
There are a whole lot of people who were very, very enthusiastic about technology. I remember one character, and I think he was in the ACS, but I have lost touch with him many years ago. But he was a Cambodian background, and
Right.
he'd recently arrived in Australia, which after a lot of troubles at that period, Cambodia, he'd spent time in refugee camps and all of that
Yeah.
sort of stuff. And he really helped me do my first compilations of COBOL
Okay.
and
Yeah.
Unisys operating system. Was it? Was it? No, it's not. I can't even remember the name of it now, but
Right.
thankfully, probably.
Yeah.
But he was really, really helpful because he was really enthusiastic about it. And I actually remember him saying to me one day, it was probably late 90s, when we first had what were called portable laptops in those days. And this is when I was working for the Big Six, and it was more like a sewing machine size thing that you lugged around with you.
Sure.
He was saying, "Oh, isn't that great? We can take these home. I could even work on the way home in the car if my wife drives." And I think, "You're crazy.
Yes. Yeah.
Why would you do that?"
Yeah.
Because obviously you were desk bound, you were office bound. It was 9 to 5 or ish,
Yeah.
that type of thing. But his enthusiasm was really
Yeah.
memorable and all that. He's a wonderful person.
And I would imagine that the luggables of the time, I mean, this is not a trivial task lugging the thing around.
Well, it wasn't. And at one part of my career, which was the late 1990s with the Big Six, I spent a week, a month in Seoul, Korea.
Okay.
And I had a what we called a luggable, which I took up and down with me.
Yeah.
And it only just fitted in the overhead lockers. And I'm sure the overhead lockers used to bow when it was actually in there because it was real. Well, the machine wasn't heavy, but the batteries were just enormous with
Yeah.
it. And it was
So you wouldn't want it dropping on your head.
You certainly wouldn't want to drop it on your head, and it was it wouldn't pass muster these days when you've only got so many kilos of hand luggage. But
Sure.
that was what we did. So
Yeah.
interesting times.
Yeah. So with ACS, you then decided to take a volunteer role. So how did that come about?
Well, I've always been interested in education. As part of my career when I was with the Big Six, I was given responsibilities for knowledge management in the 90s when nobody knew what that was.
Yeah.
And my role was Australia Asia Pacific basically, and it was a global initiative. So I spent a little bit of time with a quasi university, you might describe it, out in Boston,
Right.
where we were looking at trends in technology that are coming downstream in 5 years. And knowledge management was one of those.
Right.
This was pre-internet days and everything else, and I was. And because it was a quasi-university, there was some pretty distinguished academic advisors in there, professors who've got real expertise in things from places like Harvard and Babson College and those types of places. And I decided I'd do a PhD with it because I'm hanging around with these guys. Why not take advantage of it? Which is what I managed to do, and wrote up a lot of the work we did from a consulting perspective as case studies for the analysis in the thesis, which worked on a number of fronts, which was good.
Yeah.
So that sort of brought me into the education space, because then because I'd done that work. Typically in organisations, these things work by word of mouth and what you do. The University of Melbourne sponsors a chair of accounting at the university, and the company I was working with, I won't say who it is, but one of the big six who were the sponsors, were asked to provide somebody to sit on the academic board. So it was basically, hey Rod, you can spell university, off you go. So that's where that started.
Yeah.
And just one thing led to another, and I started doing some guest lectures, and then I ended up running some subjects, and I've been a fellow at the University of Melbourne now for over 25 years, which is an extraordinarily long time. And I regularly teach a number of subjects in the Master of Information Systems around enterprise architecture, professional IS consulting, strategic leadership, and those types of things. And I've got quite a few PhD students who work with me around those topics and the publication cycle and all of that stuff. So I've sort of, even though I'm a practitioner, I've got a foot in that camp as well. So viewed with suspicion on both sides, by the way. But it sort of ends up that's where I've been. So in a lot of ways, I'm a boundary spanner from IT, because I'm not technical, but I can talk to users. In education, I'm a practitioner. But I know what's going on in education as much as anyone ever does, I suppose. So I've got a number of dots that get joined across a number of those things, which has really been my career, building up the networks. And then to actually answer your question, how did I get involved in ACS? I started with ACS running some courses must have been around 2010, that period.
Right.
There was a program run by ACS called CPEP, which was an alternative to almost an IT degree at a graduate diploma level.
Okay.
And it was actually aimed at individuals who had not got an IT degree, but they'd worked in IT for a number of years. Much like I started off, they'd come in from the business and they were given a role in IT because there wasn't really a profession in those days.
Yeah.
So that was offered, and I became an instructor in that area, teaching change management and enterprise architecture, I think it was, within that. And I did that for a number of years, and I ended up sitting on the academic board, and I got involved with the ACS Victoria in about 2015 or so on the branch executive committee. Yeah. And one thing led to another, and I'm still here, I suppose. 10 years later, get involved in national initiatives. I was on the ACS National Academic Board for a number of years. I was on the Professional Development Board, as it was in those days. I then took on the role of Director Membership Advisory Board, or the Membership Lifecycle Board, as it was called before there was a restructure.
Okay, yeah.
And I was on Congress because of that, and participating in those things, and then joined Management Committee 4 years ago, I believe, as a National Congress rep, on the basis of being Chair ACS Victoria.
Yeah.
So I've been in ACS Victoria over that period, not continuously. I've been in and out. I've fallen in and out of favour with the voting blocks, I suppose.
Sure.
But
Yeah.
I'm back at the moment. I'm chair of ACS Victoria and representing Victoria at Congress and on the National Management Committee.
Yes.
And I guess I champion the membership side of things unashamedly, and obviously I've got a passion for younger people. With the students that I work with, I probably teach somewhere between 600 and 800 students a year,
Right.
through the various courses that I run.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I'm always asked by students, well, how do I get a job? And obviously there's the link from students to ACS.
Yeah.
One of the things I'm most proud of, and working with colleagues in Queensland, Bo Tidd, who's probably been interviewed or may well be interviewed, we created the Emerging Professionals Committees in Victoria and New South Wales, in Queensland, Bo, and that's attracted a whole lot of young people to come along, and it's really, really inspiring in a lot of ways, because when we put the call out, we didn't know what we were going to get.
Sure.
And we had about 14, probably aged between 20 and 30, I suppose, people come along, say that they were interested in doing this, and we basically shut them in a room, and the heat coming out of the room in terms of the excitement was fantastic, and they've been a very, very functional group ever since, and driven a whole lot of stuff around the supported student membership program, where we're offering complementary benefits to students to help them in their career journeys, and then obviously into the workplace.
Right.
So a lot of those things have been really, really satisfying in a lot of ways, which drives a lot of the stuff. So you see, and as a lecturer, it's really interesting that I think about 3 of the 12 or so on the Emerging Professionals Committee were actually my students.
Right.
So that's really satisfying that they still want to talk to me after assessing them all those years, and they're coming back and they're giving back, and they recognise the benefit that's come through that, and I think that's a really, really inspiring story.
No, that really is,
and that's a really good thing. And then on the other side of it, a lot of my students in the past are now my clients.
Right.
So there's a great sort of connections that you build up in that process. And would I have done that without ACS? Probably not, because we've got the infrastructure. I'll call it the infrastructure. And look, it doesn't always work. Yeah. And it's pretty broken, as we all know, in recent times. But we're trying to work towards fixing that. But overall, it's been successful to be able to give that, what would you call it, that focal point. Yeah. To be able to drive some of your passions, to be able to sit back and in somewhat of self-satisfaction and think, hey, that actually worked. That was a good thing to do, and I'm quite pleased with the outcome of that. And more importantly, other people are getting a lot of benefits out of that. So so there's a sort of a history of ACS from a perspective, I guess, of being involved on that level.
So you touch on a very big challenge for ACS at the moment of attracting younger members, younger technologists. How do you see ACS dealing with that challenge? Do you want to get that?
I don't, but I'll send it away.
So,
okay. So I guess there's a couple of things there, the positives and negatives on that. So the supported student membership program that we just spoke about met enormous resistance from staff and other elected members. It's not going to work, you can't give things away free, all of the reasons that you get from a change management point of view, why something's not going to work. So that was, like a lot of things, getting things done in ACS was enormously difficult and stressful, and all of those things as you go through the process. But at the end of the journey, we've got there, but there's a lot of things that we haven't got there yet. And there's a lot of things to do, perhaps to redress the culture that's built up in ACS, which is basically a knee-jerk reaction. If there's a new idea that comes up, the answer is no.
Right, yes.
And we have a policy that says you can't. And quite often that's just BS. It's not there. So there's a lot of things to try to work through and do that and butt heads with different feelings. So there's a lot of change that's gone on in ACS. I feel that the ship's turned, but it's in very early stages of straightening out again. So there's still a lot more to go. There's some, if we're talking the gardening analogy, there's a bit of pruning to do to right size what we're doing to get the philosophy back to focusing on our members. Yeah. As opposed to other things which can just chew up resources which we probably don't need to do.
Sure. So on that member value, where do you see ACS, what do you see its position in the IT sector?
Well, it's pretty poor at the moment. I think we've got something like under 2% of the total membership, if we're to believe the statistics. And there are any number of statistics, including the ACS statistics from our Digital Pulse, which say something like 800,000 people every day go to work with some element of ICT in them. Yeah. Now, we have a membership which is a very small part of that. So there's obviously something that's not working in that penetration. And, ACS has made missteps along the way, which has sent people away. We haven't actually attracted people. Some of the way once people do join the ACS, and part of it's their fault as well, because you get out what you get in. Sure. But ACS has also been very guilty of getting people to join, getting them to pay their membership fee, and then they hear nothing from ACS until they get the bill for the next year, which they think, well, is there a value proposition in there? There are a number of value propositions, but they need to be explored, and I think we can do a lot better at making that clearer to the membership. And there's also penetration into industry, and I mean industry in terms of industry, government, not-for-profit, and organisational life, that ACS don't necessarily do very well. But again, we're getting much better at that. And recently we've made a lot of moves, which unfortunately is very Sydney-centric, into government circles to get good conversations going, because a lot of those relationships, they're just not there. Yep. And there's a lot of work to be done in that space. But the value proposition, I think, in a lot of cases, on the positive side, is that if you do get involved and you do exercise your not responsibilities, but your opportunities to use the resources, including the human resource networking resources, you can get a lot out of it and the value proposition. And then there are things like insurance schemes and other things that give you a place to start with. For young people, and let's say at the beginning of the life cycle, and ACS members are defined as being over 16 years of age, where again ACS is doing some really good things in reaching back into the secondary schools to encourage study in ICT, to look towards going to university, getting a career and moving forwards. Essentially what students want, and at the younger ages the students are guided by parents, is some satisfaction they're going to get a job. Sure. And we the links sometimes between ACS and getting that job are not there. Again, I think we're doing some things which are really helping. Yeah. The Emerging Professionals Committee, for example, has been very active in running resume roasts. Right. Which is really, here's a student who's looking for a job, come along, bring us your CV and and we'll give you a critique. Yeah. And we'll link you up with recruiters who will give you that critique. So we don't want to be brokers and compete with Seek or anything like that, but to be able to help and nurture people into those careers is a really important part of what we do, and we should be doing a lot more of. And it's a matter of capacity, obviously, to be able to do that. And I think that's a real value proposition to get that in place. The trick for us is going to be is that once they've got that job, that they don't forget us. Right. That ACS is continually part of their life, whether they're passive or active in the process. Yeah. And again, there's a lot of work to do there. Sure. And there's some early signs that we're starting to do that work.
You just mentioned too about parents encouraging kids to get into IT careers, and as you've mentioned in Digital Pulse, that's one of the things that's consistently comes out there, that there's a chronic shortage of people entering the IT or studying IT at school and K to 12 level. How do you see ACS's role in trying to address that?
It's a matter of perception, and I think ACS, again, we've got some good resources who are focused on that area, but I don't know how many secondary age students there are in Australia. There's a lot of them, and we've got to get out to those messaging out to them. So being present at careers fair and orientation days and developing relationships with schools, with the careers advisors is really important. Working with organisations like the Digital Learning and Teaching Victoria group, who are basically a bunch of teachers who teach the digital curriculum to secondary students, is really important. I think we've got a really important role there, and we have a very strong connection here in Victoria with that, which is great. We need to be able to do more of that, and that's not a criticism of what we're doing. It's about capacity again to do that, to build that knowledge. So snapshots of value outcomes, maybe interviews like this with students, you know, I studied it and I went to university and I got this job, or and I'm really happy doing it. Really the sort of anecdotes that we need to be able to provide as resources to give that indication to people that a career in ICT is not all sitting in front of a computer with being very introverted people who don't want to talk to anybody, because it's there's some of that. But that's not all of those 800,000 people. Half of them are involved in what we might call stakeholder engagement activities, asking their requirements, helping them settle things, doing training, or all of those sorts of things. So it's not just about the technology, it's about the profession of making the technology work.
So on a broader, given your experiences over what, 30 years, how do you see the Australian technology industry or sector as a whole going?
I think it's very vibrant at the moment. It's very good. I think we're seen as being early adopters. That's true to some extent, but a lot of our corporates are not early adopters. They're essentially, because of Australia's size of economy, they're really agents of larger international organisations. So they follow what head office does, which is probably somewhere else. So the opportunity for their CEO, even in large corporates, if they're internationally based, is fairly limited to do innovation and take those risks to do that. But having said that, I think our industry is pretty mature. We're certainly, I've done work with some developing countries looking at digital literacy, and some of the challenges that they've got pale some of the challenges that we've got here into being really insignificant. For example, we've got access to reliable electricity and power and all of those things, that everything keeps running. We've got relatively recent infrastructure in place, and it's continually being upgraded, whereas other countries are struggling with, we don't even have electricity, so how can we use that? We've got no broad education in the community, so they wouldn't be able to use those things, because some people can't even read and write. So there's a whole gulf of things. So I think we can be fairly satisfied and grateful that we're in that place, and that the profession is quite vibrant in continually refreshing that. Does that answer your question?
And how do you see, and we've kind of answered this already, but how do you see ACS fitting into those developments in the IT sector?
Well, I think there's a few things there. Firstly, in skilling people and giving them an opportunity. Even if you're in business for 30 years like I am, I still need to learn and keep up with things, because it's a very fast-paced area. So what you learned yesterday is not going to be any good in next week, maybe. So ACS has got a real role in making sure that current trends and all of those things are known about, and actually connecting to the resources that are available to get people. So that's about relationships with industry bodies, with the vendor community, so they can show their wares, with the education areas, so that they can adapt or use the latest tools and technologies and trends to be able to inform their student cohorts. There's a lot of things that ACS can and does
Yeah.
can do in that space. So again, there's a lot of opportunity. So it'd be unrealistic for ACS to be able to jump from its current membership of say 20,000 to 800,000
Sure.
within 12 months or even 5 years for that matter.
Yeah.
It's a huge, but there's certainly penetration into that area, so there's more influence and more recognition. Can scale up quite quickly.
Yeah.
But I don't know what the tipping point for that, crossing that chasm is to be able to build that acceleration of motion.
Yeah.
But certainly ACS has got a lot of contribution to make into that space.
Yeah. Which leads in probably to my final question is where would you like to be seeing ACS going?
Me personally?
Yep.
Well, exactly what I'd like to see is exactly what I've been saying there is that we're at every conversation at every table, which is talking about ICT strategy in terms of where is this economy going.
Yeah.
At every conversation in terms of how do we develop the education systems. So that's primary, secondary,
Tertiary.
higher.
Yeah.
And vocational as
Yep.
well, because there's a big part
Sure.
in all of that. So we need to be seen as a viable player and a trusted advisor in that space. And then from the individual point of view, individual professionals going to work, we're there to support their ambitions.
Right.
So it's not just about educating students so you can give them a kick start. It's about that continual lifelong learning process that everybody should be going through, and ACS should be able to provide the resources and the capabilities of interest at different levels to support that journey, I suppose, at the end of the day.
Yeah. So on that, is there anything else that you'd like to add?
There is one story which struck me, and I think this is an important story, and I'm actually stealing it from one of our emerging professionals committee people who's a young man who's migrated to Australia from another country. Obviously, if you're migrating, that's where you come from.
Yeah.
Who came to Melbourne to study, didn't have much money behind him, so went to what we might say is a second tier educator, but persevered.
Yeah.
Got his degree, but more importantly along the way he made every effort possible to get involved with the local ICT industry, building relationships, forming networks, joining ACS, coming to a lot of our events, talking to as many people as he possibly could. He's very much one of our, what we call them, rock stars in terms of that space, where he's got himself to high profile. He's built his career. Never actually applied for a job, as I understand it, but because of all this efforts, he met somebody, and he's working in a consulting house, and he's been there for a few years, been promoted, so he's on the right trajectory. So that's a really admirable story. There should be more of that.
Yeah.
The key point in that is that he got involved and found his way.
Yeah.
The tragedy in all of this is that along the way he spoke to a number of other friends, colleagues, other students, and tried to encourage them to come along and do the same thing, and they didn't.
Yeah.
And the tragedy in that is that we see that we know that there are so many students who are looking for jobs.
Yeah.
And they've sent off 400 or so CVs and not got one interview.
Yeah.
Because and part of the reason for that is that they've not got the networking skills or the capabilities to do that.
Yeah.
Now, part of that is maybe initiative, maybe they're introverted and it's a difficult thing to do. There's been various, what I'm told is there have been various excuses why they wouldn't do that. Oh, because I'm a foreigner, they won't talk to me, or I've got an accent. And that is something that really needs to be pushed away.
Sure.
I believe that's wrong perception. We've all got an accent.
Yeah.
And we all live with it, and we live in a very diverse profession.
Yeah.
You look at the people who work and come to our events. We've got every face from around the globe in there, and that's fantastic. And that's how we work. That's how society is. And so the tragedy in that is the confidence around that and not having done that.
Yeah.
And now the second tragedy on top of that is that we hear so much about the digital economy and our skill shortage, as we've been pointing out for many years in Digital Pulse.
Yeah.
But these students who've graduated with perfectly good qualifications can't get a job in ICT, and now they're riding around on motorbikes delivering Uber.
Yeah.
And the reason they're doing that is that they've assessed their options in Australia. Okay, I can't get a job in ICT, so I'll give up.
Yeah.
I'm actually better off economically living in Australia, getting paid, being able to spend enough money to support my family and send a little bit home to support my extended family who need it. And I'm better off. So that's what I'm doing. But the tragedy for the Australian economy in there is that we've got all that resource riding around delivering pizzas when they could be better applied into the jobs.
Yeah.
Now, it's not as simple as just line them up and they'll get the jobs, but there's something in there that I think, and we're certainly working towards with the emerging professionals and what we're doing with students to try and address that in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the burning platforms that we, as an ACS, if we could solve that, even if we could only 50% solve that, we would help fill that skills gap.
Yeah.
And we would satisfy so many individuals in terms of their individual aspirations to grow and have a professional life.
Yeah.
Because you can't by any stretch of the imagination say that delivering pizzas for the rest of your life is what you want to do.
Oh, exactly.
Yeah.
And you're freeing up that opportunity for those individuals and broadly for the Australian economy. That's a lot of unrealised wealth there.
It is. It's absolutely, and it's a tragedy in terms of the aspirations of an individual who's either paid for it themselves or their parents have paid for it, who've not been able to achieve what they set out to do and have taken perhaps a better position they would have had if they hadn't done it, but they've not achieved what their potential is.
Yeah.
And I find that really distressing in a lot of ways.
Yeah. Well, and that's probably a good way of describing where ACS can sit there and realising people's potentials.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, well, on that, we'll wind up on that. And I really appreciate your time on that and great discussion.
All right. Thanks, Paul.
Thank you very much.